over the last 240 years came this sense that the American dream consisted of being able, no matter how low-born you might be, to do things that your parents couldn't have. And this has never been my dad was a shepherd, and his dad was a shepherd, and his dad was a shepherd, so I suppose I'll be a shepherd sort of society. No, we are ingrained practically from birth into thinking that it's not only within our reach, but actually our responsibility to kind of do an assay of who we are and what we got going for us, and then to fix that. And if we don't become president of the United States, well, aren't we a disappointment?
I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Arun Rath is a correspondent for both NPR and WGBH News, and he's served as host of All Things Considered. Bob Garfield is the co-host of Public Radio's weekly Peabody Award-winning On the Media. He's also been a columnist and contributing editor for the Washington Post Magazine, The Guardian, and USA Today. Please join me in welcoming Bob Garfield and Arun Rath.
Thank you. And Bob and I have been friends for years now. So we used to work on the media together. So it's really nice to be here talking with you.
It sure is.
Welcome. So we're going to talk for about maybe 15 minutes, and we're going to get your questions in. So think about exciting, interesting questions that you might have for Garfield. But first, let's talk about your book, your manifesto, a little bit.
Let's.
So you lay this out in it's in 3 parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But first out, you lay out in detail basically why we're screwed right now. Is that a fair? If I can sum it up, tell me if basically we have a non-functioning government or dysfunctional government and a non-functioning fourth estate at the same time, and that's a pretty bad mix for you from where you're sitting.
It's a catastrophic mix, and it's exacerbated by the fact that what has replaced a robust, functional fourth estate is the Google Facebook duopoly, which does the opposite of giving people the opportunity to discover facts and truth and say various perspectives. It has turned the democratic promise of the internet upside down and instead created this vast archipelago of filter bubbles, which is where tribes of ideology, sometimes very, very finely sliced tribes, dwell, and completely impervious to any signal from the outside world, because that's the business model of Facebook and YouTube and so forth. So the combination of those has put us in a real fix. And the question is how to fix it. I don't think at this stage, and perhaps not for at least a generation, can we depend on the institutions of government to do it. Certainly not the judiciary. Or the legislature. So it seems. So that leaves it to us to intervene to preserve democracy and also truth, justice in the American way. It's not going to be easy. It will take effort. It will take more than just tweeting your rage out. And the third part of the book is the actual manifesto that says what you all have to do.
We're going to talk about all of that in more detail, especially the latter part, your prescriptions. But first, a bit more on the diagnosis, because we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about in detail about why we're in this bad position that we're in. But one of the things that's interesting about your diagnosis of this is that you say that our current degree to which we're screwed is, in a way, our own fault. That there's something baked into the American experiment.
Hold it.
That has
not my fault, dude.
Right.
It's everybody else's fault. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But that this coming to this failure point of American democracy was built in somehow to American democracy.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Thomas Jefferson, and
it's his fault.
Yeah. He's a liberal hack. Thomas Jefferson's fault because he created this notion of the pursuit of happiness. And with it, over the last 240 years, came this sense that the American dream consisted of being able, no matter how low-born you might be, to do things that your parents couldn't have. And this has never been my dad was a shepherd, and his dad was a shepherd, and his dad was a shepherd, so I suppose I'll be a shepherd sort of society. No, we are ingrained practically from birth into thinking that it's not only within our reach, but actually our responsibility to kind of do an assay of who we are and what we got going for us, and then to fix that. And if we don't become president of the United States, well, aren't we a disappointment? I mean, we've learned this from Jefferson. We've learned it from every commencement speaker we have, and it is a notion that has yielded. I mean, this is kind of cutting to the chase, but there are some people who Gatsby-like attain riches, or who Obama-like somehow become president. Even though we're African American, and some people thought it would never happen. But there are a whole lot more Willie Lomans, and who feel disappointed, even humiliated by that they have not fulfilled this promise that we make for all of our children in American society, that they can and should, actually must prosper. And
what's the line about Willie Loman? Notice must be
attention must be paid, is what Mrs. Loman instructed her children with respect to their father. And in fact, what Donald Trump has done for his base is precisely what Mrs. Loman prescribed for Biff and whatever the other kid's name was, to pay attention, to make him seem important. And Trump is not the problem. He is an expression of the problem of a lot of disappointed Americans who feel like their destiny and the destiny of the nation that they thought was theirs has not only slipped through their fingers, but gone into the hands of others who don't deserve the bounties of the American dream. So that's a big part of the premise of this book. And the other half of the first third of the book concerns identity and America's fixation on individual identity. So I could talk more about that.
Well, let me ask you about that in the context of other, because there's a cultural critique in there, and it seems like you're edging into territory which might be a little bit. Well, are you saying the same thing that maybe, say, Donald Trump Jr., who wrote this book, Trigger, which I actually haven't read, but a lot of the critique of the multiculturalism that got us to where we are now, saying that is that at fault here? Is that blame, that kind of celebration of identity and who we are? Are you pointing a finger there?
I am pointing a finger there, and I'm not the first to do it. Arthur Schlesinger did it 35 years ago in a book called The Disuniting of America, and he was, a sort of liberal standard bearer, and he realized that one of the unforeseen outcomes, well, he foresaw it, so I guess not unforeseen, but one of the dystopian aspects of multiculturalism could be the infinite slicing and dicing of American identities into various tribes or interest groups, all of which with grievances, yielding some of the benefits that multiculturalism yields, and I will do a shout out for that in a moment, but also yielding factionalism, tribalism, enmity, and constant tension of the sort we saw, for example, with the Women's March. Now, after Donald Trump was elected, women, realizing the threat that represented, took to the streets in large numbers all over the country. It was a great expression of frustration and fear and outrage at what America had voted for, or what the Electoral College had voted for. Unfortunately, that was kind of the end of the story, because unlike Hong Kong and France and elsewhere, the marching in the streets is pretty much dissipated, which is a crying shame. But with respect to the Women's March in particular, what happened was in the Chicago organization, there was the Jews in the organization were upset that the African Americans in the organization were too slow to renounce what Louis Farrakhan had to say about Jews and the LGBT community and so forth. And this began a rift. And next thing you know, the next Women's March was canceled.
Killed the momentum of the Women's March.
And then in LA, a similar thing happened. The African Americans were afraid that the march would be too white and Jewish, and they didn't want the expropriation of their experience and their outrage by white folks. And so what should be a unifying coalition to deal with the unheard of depravity of this administration, it turned into an internecine fight. And the result of it was the organization for marching in the streets, according to the First Amendment, to peaceably assemble, it just fell apart. There was another episode that I think kind of crystallizes the problem that Arthur Schlesinger and, of course, the brilliant thinker Donald Trump Jr. articulated. Oh, I see. This is a microphone that, why, it amplifies one's voice. Not being familiar with it. No, no, I'm sorry. So, so there's this actress named Alyssa Milano who has a long history as an activist, feminist, and I guess generally progressive activist. And she's got the bona fides, and she puts a lot behind it besides a tweet. She gets arrested, and she appears, and she speaks, and sometimes courageously. And about a year ago, she put out a tweet that said something like, "I am trans. I am African American. I am Latinx. I am this. I am that." It was a sort of I am Spartacus moment where she was expressing solidarity with all of the various marginalized groups who she believed have been oppressed historically. And she just wanted to say that we are all in this together. Oh, no. No. She was absolutely flamed in social media because how dare she, privileged, white, wealthy Hollywood actress, expropriate the pain that each of these groups has actually suffered and the actual oppression. How dare she virtue signal and kind of slum in their oppression? And that's the downside of multiculturalism and tribalism and the ever finer slicing of grievance. Let me just say, this is a disclaimer. I'm not against multiculturalism. It has created enormous richness in our society. It has helped various interest groups and those with grievances to attain social justice, which has been a gathering snowball in the society since the end of World War II. It has the music is better, the food is better, the fashion, although evidently now you can't do that because on the expropriation grounds. But never mind, on balance, multiculturalism I think has been an important positive force. But that is not to deny that there have been some unintended consequences. And the greatest unintended consequence, and thank you for letting me ramp up on this, is the political right. Because all these fringe deplorables, whether it's misogynists, the pickup artists and the neo-Nazis, the nativists, the large swaths actually of the religious right, have found in multiculturalism and political correctness, they think it's a siege on all they value, all they cherish about the world that they grew up in. And they see all this great progress, that snowballing progress of social justice since World War II. They see it as a slap in the face. And so now, and they've been seething for 50 freaking years. And in Trump, they have found an identity of themselves, and it's called the alt-right. It's called Trump's base. And it is clearly a powerful force. He still has 30 to 40% support in the United States of America. And this is the unintended consequence of identity politics.
Let's tie this into another main theme of your book, which the social media landscape, that all this is.
Excuse me, I'm going to commandeer a situation here. Sir, there's a seat there for you.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
such a sweetheart.
Ain't I but?
Well, likely a fair number of the individuals on Twitter flaming Alyssa Milano were probably Russian bots, right? This is, getting to like another point in your book about how all of this.
That was nicely done. I want to
see
thank
that?
you. Yeah, I see what you did there. Yeah, some of it was bona fide outrage from actual members of identity groups, and some of it was mischief by bots and trolls and others who have a stake in creating disruption in the society, the culture, and the body politic. So yes. So if it's true that America's fixation on identity it's not unique in the world. I mean, there is elsewhere in the world people fixate on identity too, usually in a nationalist way. But in America, it has been ingrained in us, since for 243 years, and it is in all of our marketing. You don't buy a beer because of whether you like the beer. You buy it because of what it projects about you. You don't not only have a sports team you like, you wear its brand, its logo on your clothes, and you paste it on your car. And this has always been true, but now there is a digital venue for the ultimate in self-expression, for defining for the world who you are, and that is your Facebook page. And it's not only your Facebook page, it's your Facebook habits. So you are well aware that if you buy a pair of shoes, you shop for a pair of shoes, and on the internet, and you'll continue to get ads fed to you no matter what site you're on. For the next number of months, they'll keep feeding you pictures of that same pair of shoes until they find, because they know that eventually the odds are that you will break down and buy them, and that it benefits them to keep advertising to the same people over and over because their chances of making a sale are very good. Well, that's the way Facebook works outside of the realm of advertising too. Its goal is to have you stay in its environment for as long as possible. The more hours you spend on Facebook, the more ads they serve, the more money they make. And they know absolutely to a fairly well, because they have the world's largest data set on human behavior. They know that if you spend time looking at conspiracy theories, or for that matter, studying chess, or shopping for sex toys, that your feed will reflect your past habits. And if you surf for that stuff, if you look at it, you'll get fed more. If you share it among your friends in your own filter bubble, you'll get still more, until eventually, like the rats who choose between water and cocaine, and they always end up drinking the water with the cocaine, you will always get the water with the cocaine. And in that sense, the Facebook business model is pretty much like the Sinaloa cartel. They know what their public wants, and they will deliver to them, and they do not care about the consequences. So if you look at the intersection of human nature, especially American human nature, of the collapse of the fourth estate because of the digital revolution, and all, I go into the details of how the media economy has collapsed fairly well in the book, and the rise of the Google, Facebook duopoly, you will see how it was actually, we could not but have found ourselves in this situation where there is no up or down, there is no black or right, there is no truth or falsity. There is only what you're fed among your tribe. And I don't remember who said it. I believe it was Aristotle who first used the words that they are some scary shit.
On that, why don't we start taking some questions from the folks here? And one thing, we haven't gotten any of your prescriptions for solutions to this. So I'd maybe request that we'd have some questions along those lines. But
we could defeat Trump as Democrats if we all got together and unified, regardless of whether you like the other guy. But we're not gonna. So here's the big problem. It isn't Facebook. 40% electoral percentage doesn't win the presidency. 60% does. So 40 and 60 is 100. 43% of the electorate stayed home in 2016. You know that.
Okay, first of all, let me answer you this way. First of all, don't we me, because I'm not a Democrat. I do get up in the morning and I start hating Trump before I brush my teeth, and the entire Republican caucus in Congress. But I don't view this from a partisan point of view. I view it from the state of democracy point of view. But as such, I'm rooting for a Democrat, any Democrat, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. If Jeffrey Dahmer wanted to jump into the race.
But this gets to your point about the opposition turning in on itself, right?
Right, but
what's your prescription?
Yeah, well,
for
first of all, in this book, I don't really worry about what the politicians are up to, because I don't think our solution lies there. But
I guess the Purple Democracy Project. You think that?
Yeah, I can address that, because that's a sort of not unrelated but separate thing that I'm up to. But the primary process is all about figuring out who's going to be the standard bearer, right? So they're going to disagree. The key is that when it's all over with, they all join arm in arm and pretend they can stand each other, and then support whoever the nominee is. I mean, that's the goal. And if there's been some damage along the way because they've gone back and forth, well, that's also a standard part of the electoral process. So I'm not sweating the fact that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are fighting over who's a liar or not, because in 6 months' time that will be forgotten, I hope. The Purple Project. So there's me. As you can probably tell, I have some relatively strong feelings about the state of the democracy, and one way of approaching it is a kind of an activist point of view, which I'm espousing in this book, which includes a whole bunch of stuff, including an advertiser boycott of Fox News and the breakup of Facebook and Google, and a whole bunch of other stuff in my manifesto for how to fix all of this. But another part of me, if you can hold these two opposing ideas in your head at the same time, is with a completely nonpartisan project called the Purple Project. And what triggered the Purple Project was some academic colleagues of mine, saw some data that showed that an astonishing, staggering percentage of Americans are so disaffected, so fed up with politics as usual, that they're prepared to give something else a try. Like, I don't know, tyranny. More than 30% of millennials in one very large poll. I mean, I'm not talking about an internet poll. I'm talking about, a real poll. Details herein. Said they were comfortable, they would consider authoritarian governments, strong leader, or army rule. Army fucking rule. And, I don't think our democracy is in good shape. And I don't think we are free of failures and sins going back the entire 243 years. I mean, it is a really, really long list of what this country has gotten wrong. Overthrowing Iran, slavery, the Tuskegee, Abu Ghraib. I mean, it is a really long list of how our democracy has let us down. But we're not North Korea. We're not Myanmar. We're not Philippines. We're not Brazil. We're not Poland. We're not Hungary. We're not Turkey. And God help us, we are not Russia or China. We still have political freedom here. And for the moment, check back with me in about 6 weeks' time. This is nothing to throw away. do not throw the democracy baby out with the political frustration bathwater. And the Purple Project is intending to educate people and kind of reinvigorate the idea of how precious the democratic system is and how our way of life still stands head and shoulder above most of the other societies of the world. So there's that. There's that kind of let's just get things to some sort of equilibrium and let people understand how Constitution is meant to work, how the system is meant to work, what journalism does, how to understand what's real news and what's fake news, all that stuff, and kind of staunch. Is that the word? Staunch. Stop the bleeding. Stench the bleeding. We must stench the bleeding, and then in parallel, we have to get to work doing what we can as citizens, our duty to protect what has been bestowed upon us.
How specifically was the Purple Project implemented? I missed that.
Yes, you missed that. I'm sorry to say. It's something we've been working on for 2 years, and its big public launch was for Thanksgiving, and at which time I got deathly ill and was not able to execute on much of the stuff that we needed to execute to make it all happen. But we have a brand, we have a website which aims to, and there's tons and tons of content that looks into every aspect of democracy, educational and also journalistic content. We have connections to organizations, to the whole universe of media, civic engagement and civic literacy groups that have been fighting in the trenches every day for decades. And we've tried to create a community of people who are dedicated, and all this towards the goal of ultimately creating a social benefit for those who do participate in their communities, and a corresponding social liability for those people who decide to check out. In the same way that friends don't let friends drive drunk, we hope that in 5 years' time, friends won't let friends opt out of the system. So that's the Purple Project. And that's one part of my efforts. And the other is, let's get those fuckers. Yes, sir.
After 2016, there's been a lot of hand-wringing about the Electoral College and it being anti-democratic. But the Senate, I see, as an even bigger problem. If demographic trends continue in this country, by 2015, it's estimated that 70% of the population will live in just 15 states and therefore be represented by only 30 senators. And the rest of it will be red. So you'll have 70 senators representing 30% of the population, and they will be able to do whatever they want. They'll appoint the Supreme Court justices, and they'll be able to block anything that the other 70% might want to do in the blue states. How do we address that without rewriting the Constitution?
Well, there's some thought about rewriting the Constitution. I mean, there's thoughts about a number of things. To fight gerrymandering that has created the situation that gives such control. There's talk of abolishing the Electoral College. There is ranked choice voting. There are policy initiatives which address these structural problems that have evolved. This book does not concern itself with that. As I say, the presumption here is that in the judiciary and in the state houses, we have lost this battle for a generation. And I say we, I don't mean we Democrats. I mean we who believe that democracy should be used for democratic purposes, not to usurp democracy itself. So what I'm calling for is let others do the policy, take on, tilt at the policy windmills. I'm trying to essentially start a movement of individual action for citizens to take these matters in their own hands, not through civil disobedience or, running to Canada, fleeing, but by taking advantage of what is available to us as citizens to fight this system that has evolved or devolved to the state that you just described. But since you actually laid that all out, I think let's just go to Denmark, really.
Along those similar lines, Citizens United, it's this giant roar that, at least to my thinking, drowns us out. I love the ideas that you're putting forth. I'm worried about just being unable to be heard among the amount of noise level that Citizens United, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard the joke that every politician should wear pretty much a NASCAR suit showing who owns them, basically. What are your thoughts on that?
How old are you?
I'm 63. Sorry about that.
You're gonna die under Citizens United.
You think?
It's hard for me to imagine. I mean, unless there is some sort of horrendous accident at the Supreme Court summer retreat, I do not see a way that the High Court and the whole rest of the judiciary is going to be denuded of the appointments under this administration, some of whom are not only ideologically conservative, but actual morons. And they're ideologues, and I'm just completely in despair for anything happening in our lifetime that's going to substantially change the judiciary outlook. So, there's always more legislation. What can happen is that there can be more legislation that will go through the judicial process, but they might survive it long enough to add some sanity or equilibrium to the system.
So with, you conceded in terms of the government side, we're screwed for the next generation. But in your prescriptions, you do talk about things that can be done. Maybe we can end with something positive. That one of the things that's really interesting that I hadn't considered before reading this book was you talk in detail about the billions of dollars that have been taken over in the advertising world by Facebook and Google. But the lost billions of advertising dollars that are going to third-party crooks and advertisers, and you have an idea of being able to claim that back somehow.
Yeah, the world advertising market is about $600 billion, which is not an insignificant sum of money, and it used to be split up by 100,000 media organizations of some size or another. Now the pool of dollars hasn't grown, but the number of organizations that it's divvied up among is now almost infinite. I mean, tens of millions of people vying for the same pot of money, and at the risk of over simplifying, that's why your newspaper looks like this. That's why all the bureaus have been closed. That's why it doesn't cover the out-of-town sporting events. That's why the New York Times no longer covers crime in New York City. That's why we have political coverage in Washington to a fairly well, but the state houses are going entirely uncovered, as are the county courthouses, as are the municipal authorities, and all the people who actually have an effect on our lives. And it's a great tragedy. The utter collapse of the media economy is a great tragedy. And the only people who have not suffered under this are Facebook and Google, which literally snap up every new dollar of spending that comes into the advertising market goes to them. None of it goes to the other tens of millions of publishers. And they, of course, have the biggest audience, and they have the most data, which has been abused and abused and abused. One of the chapters of the book, which is by far the most boring. I mean, it's unbelievable. If any of you have a sleeping issue, I strongly advise the first chapter in the Manifesto
most
part.
interesting things.
Yeah, but you got a more shut eye in the last couple of weeks, haven't you? So it talks about how of that $600 million, a third of it is taken up by Google and Facebook, which is unbelievable. Another third of it is divvied up, and maybe not a full third of it, but a lot of it goes to middlemen, crooks, bots, ad tech vendors, all siphoning off part of the overall ad spend. And this is it's catastrophic for news organizations. And so the notion is, I discuss various ways in the book where that third of a $600 million, which would be $200 million, but I think it's actually not quite that much, but it's north of $100 billion, could be recovered and put back into the media ecosystem, which wouldn't solve all the problems, but would sure make a tremendous difference.
Enough to help your local paper.
Enough to help your local paper. And, I don't know much about the finances of the Globe, for example, but it's obviously a far less robust news organization than it was in the past. It hasn't made any significant amount of profit in 15 years, maybe 20 years. And it is, if it didn't have a billionaire owner who is determined to have a independent journalistic voice in the region, and also, have the power attendant to being the publisher of the Boston Globe, the owner of the Boston Globe, it would be in even sorrier shape than it's in now. So there are ways to add money to the media economy. And I'm just glad I work in public radio, which, even though our business model is really, really weird and does not match the technological reality around it, is continuing to thrive and prosper. So
I think we are at the point to, we need to go to signings. Yeah. So Bob, maybe ending on you insulting our local paper is a good.
I don't think I want to end on that note, because then you might think ill of me. I just want to say one thing. This is a book talk. It is not necessarily a book signing. Nobody is here is compelled to purchase a book. I just don't want to say two things. Number one, I have a freshman in college and a significant unfunded tuition liability. And secondly, again, I cannot demand that you buy a book, but should you decide to do so, I strongly suggest that you buy not one, but two, in case, God forbid, something should happen to the first copy.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Arun.